We've got some notable injury news to cover, a couple of roster moves, and two narratives that need to disappear quickly today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, folks, welcome in. We've got a variety of things to cover today. We'll start with some notable injury stuff. Some guys that got hurt, some guys that came back from injury. So some bad news and good news there. Then the Bills made a bunch of roster moves, and most of them we covered on yesterday's episode, but they signed another new wide receiver, and we now know a bunch of corresponding moves that we need to break down. And then lastly, there's a couple of narratives that, well, they began last year, and they seem to not be going away so far this year. And so we'll talk about that in segment 3. But let's start with the biggest story right now coming out of Buffalo Bills training camp, and it is Matt Milano. Matt Milano had what appeared to be an arm injury during the Tuesday practice, and he didn't finish practice, and we don't know the severity of the injury. And so I think the best thing I can do for you to break this down is to share some information courtesy of Matt Beauvais on Twitter. This is what he said about what happened with Matt Milano. And obviously, we'll wait to find out what the severity of the situation is. There's a wide range of outcomes, but this is what we know at this point. Again, courtesy of Matt Beauvais. Matt Milano didn't take any team drills during the second half of practice, was being checked on the sideline by trainers for several minutes. Looked like they were looking at his left arm/elbow. Milano never left the field and stayed in pads on the sideline. I watched Milano for at least a half an hour to see what was going on. Was very clearly in discomfort. Trainers were stretching and pulling on his left arm. Also saw him get down and do a push-up after they worked with him. Don't know the severity, but usually a good sign when a player stays on the field. He also stayed in his pads the entire time. Hope that helps with more clarity. So that's what we know. And I know that there's been a lot of imagination invoked here in terms of people saying, hey, it could be anything from a stinger to a bicep tendon tear. The bottom line is we don't know that right now. And so let's wait and find out the severity. It could be anything. But as of this point, we're certainly concerned and monitoring the status of Matt Milano in his left arm. Hopefully it's nothing. Could be something. We'll find out. That's what's going on. Now, the Bills don't practice on Wednesday. They hold a joint practice in Pittsburgh with the Steelers on Thursday. So there could be some news that comes out courtesy of NFL insiders that will give us an update. There's also a chance that the next time we hear from Sean McDermott, that's when we'll get the next update. So who knows? We'll find out. We'll keep you posted. But obviously, plenty of reason to be concerned with Matt Milano and the status of his left arm, but also very encouraging that he didn't leave the practice field and he stayed in his pads. That's all good. But he didn't finish practice, and clearly there's something wrong with his left arm. All right, so lost in the Matt Milano news, and I understand this because Matt Milano, all-pro linebacker, coming back from injury, a lot of excitement for his return. But there's another player that left practice on Tuesday and did not return, and that is offensive tackle Tylan Grable, Bills draft pick, a guy that I thought looked really good in his first preseason game against the Bears. A lot of size and athleticism. Like the development that he's shown already based on where I thought he was at UCF and what he's shown to this point, getting a chance to play left and right tackle, even getting some guard reps. I think he's looking like a guy that's going to make this roster. Hopefully there's nothing here either. But another injury to pay attention to outside of Matt Milano is Tylan Grable, who left practice on Tuesday and did not return. I don't know more than that. I don't know if it's a leg, arm. I have no idea, other than a couple of reporters shared that he didn't finish practice, and that's where we're at. Now, we do have some good news as it relates to injuries, and so we can talk about that. A bunch of players that have been out returned on Tuesday. Daquan Jones, Bill's starting defensive tackle. He's missed, feels like about a week or so with a groin injury, and he returned to practice on Tuesday. That's great news. Also, Ty Johnson, Bill's depth running back, returned to practice. He missed 13 days with a hamstring injury. So he's back in the mix, and that's great news. I think that trio of running backs, Cook, Johnson, and Davis, is a good trio, but I don't want any one of them to not be available, if that makes sense. Those guys came back, and then also Justin Shorter at wide receiver, Mack Hollins at wide receiver returned, and so did Edifwan Ulofoshio, the Bills' rookie linebacker. So the Bills get some players back, 2 guys go down, and then it seems like there's some good momentum for Cole Bishop and Mike Edwards, the safety. Felt like the reports were that they were starting to ramp up just a little bit with some of their movements during practice and what they do off to the side as they work back respectively from a shoulder for Cole Bishop, and then in the case of Mike Edwards, a hamstring. So we'll monitor all of that and keep you updated as information becomes available. All right, coming up here in the next segment, the Bills signed another receiver, and we know a bunch of corresponding moves based on all the things that happened earlier in the week. So we're going to get into all of that here on the other side of it, so be sure to stick with me. I love sports. I love them so much and never want them to stop, but as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like we want them to. But on FanDuel, they let me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. So head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, so on our last episode before this one, I talked about the additions of quarterback Ben DiNucci and wide receiver Damiere Byrd. What I didn't know at the time were the corresponding moves for the signings of these players, right? You have to create a roster spot to add a player to your roster. So we have those, but also the Bills signed another player. So let me tell you about that player, and then I'll tell you the 3 corresponding roster moves, and there's some nuance with those. So the player that the Bills added was another wide receiver, Deon Cain. Deon Cain was a 2018 6th-round pick by the Indianapolis Colts out of Clemson. He's now 28 years old, 6'2", 202 pounds, RAS score of a 6.48. So not a super good RAS score, but he did run a 4.43 40-yard dash. If you look at his athletic testing, the 40 time is really good, the 3-cone is really good, and everything else is kind of poor, especially his jumps. So 6'2", 202, runs 4.43 with an RAS of 6.48. Now, Deon Cain, he tore his ACL during his first NFL training camp, and that's never good, right? It's big setback to begin your career. So that kind of derailed him early on. And since he was drafted in 2018, again, keeping in mind he tore his ACL in 2018 during training camp, he's only played in 15 games with 9 catches for 124 yards for his career. So he spent a couple of years with the Colts, spent a little bit of time with the Steelers. He's been on the practice squads for the Ravens and Eagles and has been a big part of their preseason as a depth receiver, but not a guy that's had a lot of time on the field since being drafted. But to his credit, he was drafted in 2018. It's 2024. He's still getting opportunities. So good for him. Most notably, recently, he was in the UFL for the Birmingham Stallions. And he was on that team in 2023, and that team won the USFL championship game, and he was the MVP in the 2023 USFL championship game. He caught 3 touchdowns in that win, so he was the MVP of that game. And so the last couple of players are some of the more recent players that Brandon Beane has added in Ben DiNucci and Deon Cain. They are coming from the UFL. And so I know I received a question from somebody in the subtext this past week about Brandon Beane and if they're paying attention to the UFL because it doesn't seem like they're signing any players. Well, here you go. Got a couple players from the UFL. All right, so let's get into these corresponding moves. So now we have 3 players that were added: DiNucci, Damiere Byrd, and wide receiver Deon Cain. And that means we have to have 3 corresponding moves. Here's what they are. One of them is they waived/injured Brian Thompson, a wide receiver. Then quarterbacks Shane Buechele and wide receiver Chase Claypool went to injured reserve. And we know that Shane Buechele has a significant neck injury, but Chase Claypool has a toe injury that was originally described as day-to-day. And he goes to injured reserve. And so there was a lot of appeal for Chase Claypool when he first signed and made some noise during the spring during OTAs. Fast forward to training camp, and everybody says, well, that's when it really matters. He practices a couple of times, has this toe injury. It's day-to-day. Next thing you know, he's on injured reserve. So the forecast for Chase Claypool in Buffalo doesn't look good. And Chase Claypool is such a fascinating player, given him being a fairly high draft pick and having 2 really good seasons of production to start his career on a bad offense. And then the last 3 years have just been a complete disaster. The trade to Chicago, the trade to Miami, signing for a minimum deal to come to Buffalo, having no market. The effort concerns with the Bears, not knowing the scheme with the Dolphins. And then just injuries have been an issue. So I don't know if it's going to happen for Chase Claypool. And it certainly muddies the picture for him this year. Now, one thing in the immediate aftermath of the Bills announcing Chase Claypool to IR and Shane Buechele to IR on Tuesday was some discussion on the new injured reserve rules that are in place for the NFL. And so let's visit those because this is applicable to these situations. And it's applicable to the moves that are going to be coming for the Bills and the rest of the NFL. So here's the new IR rule. Each team can place a maximum of 2 players who are placed on an applicable reserve list on the business day of the final roster reduction to be designated for return. Such player will immediately count as 2 of the club's total designations. And as a reminder, you can only bring back 8 players from injured reserve during the season. And so if you do put a player on injured reserve on the final day of roster cuts, you can bring them back. And you can do that up to twice, but they count against those 8 players that you can bring back. So if you designate 1 to return, you only have 7 left for the season. If you designate 2, you only have 6. And so it's an interesting thing that I think is intended to eliminate what we've seen the Bills and other teams do in the past, where you cut a player on the final cut down day and it's a player that you know that they're going to keep. They quote unquote stay in the parking lot until the next day. Then the Bills or whatever team would put a player on injured reserve and then re-sign that player that they cut for just a few hours. The Bills have done this regularly with a guy like Reed Ferguson. Reed Ferguson gets cut every single year. You know he's going to make the team. They tell him to wait in the parking lot. They put some other guy in injured reserve, then re-sign Reed Ferguson. Given that these players count towards your 8 players that you want to bring back, and that they have to be placed on injured reserve on final cut day for them to qualify, I don't think that this rule is going to capture and eliminate what the NFL intended for it to do. So I think it's a good step in the right direction, and I do think you need to have a level of control on these things, but I don't feel like this is going to achieve the objective of what they wanted to do. And I still think that the Bills are going to do that this year with Reed Ferguson or whatever player. So we'll talk about that in a few weeks when the roster cuts are due. I think it's August 27th at 4 o'clock. So I get getting back to Chase Claypool and even Shane Buechele to an extent. When this news came through, a lot of people, including myself, thought, well, okay, this is the new thing that if the Bills want to bring them back, they can. Well, that's not true because it's not the last day of cuts. It's not final roster reduction day. So technically, Chase Claypool is out for the season. Now, there's another layer to this, and this information comes courtesy of Sal Capaccio. And this is what he said. He posted this in a tweet, and it's great clarification. Sal says, by being placed on injured reserve now, Claypool is ineligible to return and play for the Bills as a designated to return. However, the team can work out an injury settlement within the next 7 days. If that happens, he'll be released with that settlement and eventually be able to re-sign with the Bills for whatever amount of weeks the settlement is, plus 3 weeks. And he notes that the amount of weeks of the settlement is not made public. In that scenario, once the settlement is reached, he could sign with any team at any time. So that's the path. If he has an injury settlement with the Bills, there's a path for him to return. And maybe he returns and goes on the practice squad. We'll see. It didn't sound like this injury at the time, since it was described as day-to-day, that this was going to be a season-ending deal. So I'm somewhat expecting an injury settlement. And then from there, he'll have options. If he wants to sign with another team, he can. If he wants to come back to the Bills, he can. Obviously, the settlement and the details have to play itself out, but not a good moment for Claypool and his prospects this year. Also not entirely something that makes it impossible for him to make an impact, although I think that's unlikely. So that's that. The Bills add Deon Cain, Damiere Byrd, and Ben DiNucci, Shane Buechele, and Chase Claypool to injured reserve. Brian Thompson, another wide receiver, is waived/injured. Now, the Bills had another wide receiver on Tuesday, Lawrence Keys. He got injured and didn't finish practice. I've heard some rumblings that the Bills are looking at another receiver, and we'll see how that goes. But a lot of movement here with these wide receivers. And I wonder if it's just as simple as, hey, some guys got injured and you need to replace them in terms of numbers. I also wonder because, you know, the Bills, Damiere Byrd, 31 years old, Deon Cain, 28 years old, that has some tenure in the NFL. These aren't necessarily, and the player they're looking at, tenured player, not necessarily just getting warm bodies in the mix. It feels like potentially players that, you know, you want to see if they can actually play and help you. Is there something about the room that's not coming together the way that they want it to? Is there concern about that? Is there a miscalculation in terms of how this is adding up? Is it a matter of, hey, we like our top 4 receivers, we're not so sure about wide receiver 5 and 6, so you're churning that and trying to figure things out? I'm curious, but it'll play itself out. We'll see. But plenty of roster movement here lately for the Buffalo Bills. All right, coming up on the other side of it, there's 2 narratives that, boy, oh boy, do I want them to go away. But they're not. So we're going to break them down here for you on the other side of it. Be sure to stick with me. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. When your schedule is packed with kids' activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. Even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire. That'll get you matched with a licensed therapist. You can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn. All right, folks, we got to talk about some stuff that I don't want to talk about, but, well, it doesn't go away. So we got to talk about it. Tyler Bass, James Cook. Let's get into it. Tyler Bass, as you know, disastrous finish to the 2023 season. And the inconsistency of his offseason continues, whether it's the OTAs and most recently training camp. On Tuesday, Tyler Bass was 4 of 6 on field goals during practice. He made from 33, 30, 47, and 43, and missed from 44 and 49. That comes courtesy of Alex Brasky of Batavia Daily News. On Monday, Tyler Bass was also 4 of 6. He missed from 42 and 45, and he made from 23, 27, 33, and 60. So 4 misses in the last 2 days from 42 to 49 yards, like the most normal, frequent range of kicking field goals in the NFL. I mean, 4 of 6, that's what, 2/3, 67% for the day. It's not good enough. And my expectation, and I've said this, my expectation is for Tyler Bass to make 90% of his field goals. That's not an unreasonable request. Maybe you heard that and said, wow, Joe, that's a lot to ask. No, it's not. 11 teams in the NFL last year. 11. Nearly half made 90% of their field goals or better. And maybe you're saying, well, Joe, it's Buffalo. It's outside. It's windy. I don't care. Amongst those 11 teams, the Steelers, the Eagles, the Bears, the Browns, the Chiefs. What are we talking about? Those are hard places to kick. It's cold. There can be wind. There can be elements. Steelers, Eagles, Chiefs, Bears, and Browns. If you're going to be a handsomely paid kicker like Tyler Bass is, 90% is the expectation. And so if you're going 4 for 6 every day in practice, it's hard to believe he's going to be 90% or close to it in games. It's just not, it's not trending the right way. Now, to Tyler Bass's credit, in the preseason game, he was 2 for 2 and made 1 from 49, and it was windy. Thank you. That's great. It's just, it's disheartening, right? You feel like you have the kicker, you pay the kicker, and then immediately the kicker just starts to really lose it a little bit. I think the Bills are committed to Tyler Bass. Their messaging says that. The poking around I've done says that. The contract firmly says that. And like I said recently, I mean, is there an argument to be made that there should be some competition? Yeah, there is. There's not like good kickers sitting around waiting for jobs right now. A lot of teams do have 2 kickers in camp with 90-man rosters. And so could there be better competition that becomes available after cutdown day? Yeah, but then it's after cutdown day. And like I said recently, there's proof of concept with Tyler Bass being a good kicker. And the last thing you want to do is go from an inconsistent kicker to an inconsistent kicker while also accumulating dead cap space. So there's a lot of layers to this. The best result would be for Tyler Bass to just be a good kicker. But I don't think anybody has any confidence in Tyler Bass going out right now and hitting from any distance. Like, you're going to be holding your breath. And maybe that leads to Sean McDermott making even more aggressive decisions for going for it. And he's already very aggressive, top 5 in aggressiveness in the NFL when it comes to going for it. But, I mean, it's going to come down to Tyler Bass got to make kicks. This is with a kicker that's paid like Tyler Bass. These aren't conversations we need to be having. 90% is the expectation. Like I said, 11 teams, 11 hit that last year. Among them, the Steelers, Eagles, Chiefs, Bears, and Browns. Get it together. And one thing that I'm tired of being part of the conversation is Sam Martin and holding. Sam Martin's been a punter in the NFL for a long time. There's never been a peep about his holding. And in fact, he's had good results with Tyler Bass. Like, at some point, you got to stop blaming everybody else and just realize that Tyler Bass has to make field goals. You want to blame Matthew Smiley? You want to blame Sam Martin? No, put it through the pipes, Tyler Bass. So I don't know. I keep on hearing some other holder has to come in. Sam Martin's been doing this for a long time. There's never been one concern in the history of Sam Martin's career that suggests he has any holding issues. All right. The other narrative that needs to go away is James Cook and ball security. And it's been a thing, guys. It's been a thing. Like, it's not just victim of the moment, end of last season. Like, he had fumbles the year before. He's had some fumbles. Like, the fumbles and the drops, those are killers. And whether it's whether it's Alex Brasky highlighting on Wednesday that he had another drop during practice and the drops have been too frequent throughout the course of the summer. Now, I didn't see any issues in the 5 days I was there, but Alex has seen more than I has. So you want to see that tighten up. And then Joe Buechele of The Athletic, he wrote this last week when the Bills broke training camp at St. John Fisher. In his article, he said this: with camp practices, you have to be careful not to amplify a one-play issue as a problem. Rather, you take note of it, and should it continue, then it becomes a trend worthy of mentioning. A slight trend that has taken shape for starting running back James Cook has been some ball security issues near the end of his plays. It's pretty standard practice for the defense to attempt to rip the ball out from the offensive player near the end of the rep. Usually the attempts are futile, but on a handful of occasions this summer, it's gotten the better of Cook and the ball has hit the ground. That hit a high point on Wednesday when it happened twice. The first was during 7-on-7 when cornerback Christian Benford raking the ball out of Cook's hands after successfully James Cook catching the ball, and then during team drills, Cook again lost the ball just after the catch. Drops and fumbles. Got to get tightened up. Got to get that out of his system. You know, we'll see how it translates to the regular season, but these are killers for an offense. Putting the ball on the ground, not being able to catch the football. Got to have consistency. And for James Cook, the catching piece just continues to stun me. The thing with James Cook has been the receiving skill. Like that's the entire appeal with James Cook, was that his receiving ability. I think you can see the route running, and he's in good positions to make some catches, and he's made some great catches in his career. But unfortunately, you're left not thinking about that. You're left thinking about all the catches he's dropped. And so, again, stuff you want to see go away continues to not go away, and so we got to continue to talk about it. We'll see what happens with it. The Bills do have a nice young player in Ray Davis, who I think catches the ball extremely well. Ty Johnson's a nice depth piece. I don't think that James Cook there's any threat of him losing his job or anything like that, but these are warts in his game in addition to pass protection. And I don't know, I've tried to be honest about James Cook all offseason long, and if everyone points back to, well, a fourth in the league in rushing and all the volume and the stats are good. I don't know. Like, there's plenty to be concerned about with James Cook. And we know this team's going to want to run the football, and James Cook has to be able to be a big part of that, and taking care of the football is a big part of that. So we'll see. We'll keep tabs on it. Rooting for the guy. I want him to be awesome for the Bills, but we got to be mindful of where there's issues. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the podcast. Really appreciate you being here. Plenty of discussion to come this week. Again, a joint practice on Thursday between the Bills and Steelers. Got a preseason game on Saturday night. We'll be covering all of it here for you on Locked On Bills. Don't miss anything. Make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.